Okay, good afternoon everyone. Thanks for joining us and welcome to the kickoff of 3 new toolkits for smart growth in rural places. My name is Alex Dodds and I want to thank you for joining us this afternoon. We're going to be discussing 3 new toolkits today that are all available on our website to download. If you haven't had a chance to do so already, you can go to smartgrowthamerica.org/rural-development. Down on the right-hand side of that page, you'll see a link to a page where you can download all 3 of those toolkits. They're full of really interesting resources and information, and we'll be talking about all of that today. So I encourage everyone listening to download them and take a look as we have this conversation. We welcome your comments and questions today for the folks who you're going to hear from. For those of you following along on the webinar, you can type your questions into the chat box on your screen. You can also tweet them at us on Twitter. Our handle is @SmartGrowthUSA. We'll jump right into the main content of the program with the authors of these resources. This afternoon you're going to hear from 4 people. John Robert Smith, Senior Policy Advisor for Smart Growth America, Governor Paris Glendening, the President of Smart Growth America's Leadership Institute, Jerry Rosenberg, Program Associate at Smart Growth America, and Jeff Anderson, President and CEO of Smart Growth America. So to kick us off, we'll jump right in. I'll turn it over to John Robert.
Thank you, Alex, and thank all of you for joining the call this afternoon. Before coming to Smart Growth America some 8 years ago, I served in local government myself for 20 years, 16 years as the mayor of my hometown of Meridian, Mississippi. And while Meridian is a little larger than would meet the usual definition of rural, our economy was closely tied to small towns and rural communities that surrounded us and made a part of our regional economy. Since coming to Smart Growth America, I've worked in over 50 small towns and rural communities all across this country, basically in 3 categories of technical assistance workshops that we offer. One is an economic and fiscal health workshop that really helps local leaders plan an economic development strategy in a way that will be the most productive and really the most affordable for that local government. And we found that that works and is received well in places like Rifle, Colorado, but also in Alton, Missouri, a town of 897 people. We offer other workshops in complete streets, in land use and land use code planning, downtown redevelopment, and that literally has stretched our team from working in Longwood, Florida to Sitka, Alaska, where we'll work this September. A relatively new area of work for us in our rural places is under a program called Cool and Connected, which is at the juncture of broadband access and implementation and downtown redevelopment, really in the heart of your community. You know, it's one thing to have broadband access, it's quite another to leverage it. And that work, you'll find us in Haleyville, Alabama, or the heart of coal country, Bluefield, West Virginia, or Carrizozo, New Mexico. 16 places have received that work this year. But we also offer a fiscal impact analysis, and that really helps local leaders look at the return on investment for the infrastructure they build, the housing they locate, and how that can support or damage their finances in the coming years. And that work is proved very productive in Pittsburgh, Kansas, and in Pagosa Springs, Colorado, where we will travel in the month of May to work in that beautiful part of our country. And from all of this work, we've learned a number of things. We found that there are common themes that impact many, if not most, small towns and rural places. How do we offer affordable housing for our citizens? How do we manage the infrastructure costs that we have to provide to those citizens? And how do we ensure that the development decisions we make don't worsen already constrained local budgets? I know those were issues I dealt with as mayor, and I'm sure many of you that have joined this call face those same issues. So from those themes, we have developed 3 toolkits that we're sharing with you today. One is called Well-Placed Affordable Housing. another community facilities location, and a third digs into the fiscal impact analysis I mentioned just a few minutes ago. And I'm joined by my colleagues Jerry Rosenberg, Jeff Anderson, and Governor Paris Glendening to have a discussion about the three toolkits and how they can be used and the policies that generate from them. Paris, you were trained to be a good governor by your work first in city government and then in county government. Give those of us on the call today a perspective from the governor's chair on why these issues are important to your state of Maryland, and how local governments have prospered taking a serious look at these issues that we raised today.
Thank you, John Robert. And I might say, when you reference my local service, I occasionally do get a question from local officials. Well, why do we need a governor down here working with us? And I always tell them that I may have been governor for 8 years, but I really learned the ropes in 23 years in elected local office, including starting with a relatively modest-sized town of Hyattsville, which is about 18,000 people. So I understand the challenges that our many participants here are facing as well. The issue is a relationship in some ways between the state and the local government trying to revitalize, to create jobs and prosperity. And when implementing economic development programs, local governments will generally find that having the state as a partner can be helpful. State-local partnerships range from being very formal to episodic, that is one project at a time, and in some cases even to non-existent. In Maryland, we started a very formal approach that worked to stimulate investment in existing local communities. Special focus was on the smaller and rural communities. Our efforts made sense for Maryland and have served as a model for many other states. However, I must emphasize that there is no one model or approach that works for all states. We must be flexible, and we must say what tools or programs work best for my state and best for my community. Let me offer a quick overview from perhaps the 10,000-foot level before we turn to my colleagues in the discussion of the toolkits for local officials. Maryland's program was based on certain fundamental ideas. One, we want to bring economic growth into our existing communities, especially the smaller and rural areas. Two, we believe that encouraging investment, jobs, and growth in existing areas would help reduce sprawl and protect our agricultural, forest, and open space areas. This is especially important for a small state like Maryland. Three, we want our small communities to thrive, but to still keep their unique character that makes them special. And four, we used an incentive approach rather than regulations or mandates. The most important parts of our new program were, first, each county drew its own local plan showing where they wanted future growth to occur. The plan must follow certain criteria set forth by the state. For example, new growth must be on public water and sewer. It must meet certain density requirements, a minimum of 2 residential units per acre, and must be consistent with the county's general plan. Second, the state would locate new state facilities only consistent with those local plans. And third, priority for state grants, school construction, economic development incentives, etc., would be given to requests that supported the local plan. All new state projects, policies, and expenditures would be reviewed through a lens that asks a basic question: does this help the local government's revitalization and economic development plans, or does it contribute to sprawl? To implement this strategy, a number of programs were strengthened or new ones created. Top among these were the new brownfields incentives, a rural legacy land conservation program, a much expanded historic preservation program, new job creation tax credits, and a new incentive called Live Near Where You Work. And you can see the Maryland website to review the details of any of this. Let me just give you 2 examples of how that worked. First, in Hagerstown, Maryland, a moderate size, about 36,000 people in the western part of the state, recovering from a declining industry. They relied on the state policy of locating new facilities in a manner to reinforce the local plan about redevelopment of the downtown area. Two key decisions stood out. The semi-independent university system, in building a new campus to Western Maryland, decided to put it outside of the town in a apple farm and asked the state, of course, to build roads to make this work. On reviewing it, we said it was not consistent with the county plan to revitalize Hagerstown. We vetoed that decision. We located the facility instead downtown in some old department stores that were revitalized and some new buildings that were constructed. Today, that has become a major economic force, and that part of the town is very prosperous. Same time, another decision came up with the state court system, recommending that a new state district court building would be constructed out on the highway for the convenience of citizens. We looked at it again and said that would just promote more traffic and sprawl, and we moved it downtown, and it's now become a center of activity there as well. On a much smaller scale, the second story is a small town, Berlin, Maryland, on our eastern shore, with a population of about 4,500, is a clear demonstration of using state criteria for enhanced historic preservation program to move a number of their renovation and revitalization of historic structures to the top of the funding list. This was especially used to program several tax credits, grants, and low-interest loans. Berlin is now growing, has an expanded younger population, and was just designated as the coolest small town in America by one of the major travel magazines. Let me conclude with two observations. First, we must emphasize that one size does not fit all. Each state should develop its own unique program to meet the special needs of its local governments. Second, and very important, we recognize that many states do not have similar cooperative arrangements with their local governments, and that the local governments often must go it alone for their economic development and revitalization programs. That is why my colleagues have developed the 3 toolkits to help you prosper and to achieve your goals. And here to present the overview of the first toolkit on well-placed affordable housing is my colleague, Jerry Rosenberg, who is a program associate here at Smart Growth America.
Thanks, Governor. So while it's true that the cost of living is significantly lower in most rural areas than in metro areas, it can still be just as difficult for rural residents to afford the homes and apartments in their towns. In actuality, more than 7 million rural households spend over 30% of their monthly income on housing, which makes economic mobility extremely difficult for them. But unfortunately, affordable housing stock isn't easy to come by in many of their rural communities, especially because a large portion of affordable housing mortgages will mature in the next decade, so about 80% of them by 2025, which is going to open up the potential for these units to be converted to market rate units, and for the people that live in them that can't afford market rate units to have to move elsewhere. The affordable units that do exist are located far from the amenities that the people living in them need access to, so that's jobs, hospitals, grocery stores, schools. This makes transportation costs pretty high and forces residents to own cars and also stomach the costs that go with car ownership. So that means insurance, maintenance, fuel costs, car payments, all of those. In 2014, nationally, so not just in rural areas, but low-income renters spent almost half of their income on rent and nearly 16% of their income in transportation. And compare that to 4 years earlier in 2010, when it was 9%, that's an increase of 7% of their income in 4 years. Households in the lower third of incomes spent more on gas in 2014 than on all transportation in 1996. So that's less than 20 years. If affordable units can be located in a part of town that offers them other transportation options, that's walking, biking, transit, they can dramatically reduce their expenses. And even if families still need a car for some activities, they may actually be able to live with one car instead of two and save the costs associated with that. So how can local governments offer affordable housing in locations that will help their residents prosper at little or no upfront cost? I'm going to give you a few possibilities that we've put together. First of all, what does it mean to be affordable? What is affordable housing? That is when the cost of housing is at or below 30% of the area median income. And this can be single family or multifamily. And some markets may also naturally provide affordable market price housing, but today I'm going to focus on how governments can provide subsidized housing, since the affordable market price housing is not as common. And these subsidies are usually through federal programs. Providing affordable housing in rural areas actually helps the local economy as well. So when workers can't find housing, businesses can't recruit and retain a reliable workforce. This makes it a lot harder to grow new businesses, bring in new investment, and affordable housing can offer a lot of strong support to the local economy, especially when it's built close to town centers and built close to employers. You can even locate affordable housing in underutilized or abandoned buildings downtown, which will put housing in a great location for the people that want to live there, and also help revitalize those downtowns by getting rid of the abandoned or underutilized buildings. So one of the major problems we're looking at today is that most of today's Section 515 housing, so that's the subsidized housing in rural areas, was built in the 1970s and 1980s under 30-year mortgages, which if you do the math, we're coming up on 30 years. So developers agreed to provide affordable housing in their units for only the length of the mortgage. So now we've got to figure out what's happening after those mortgages expire. While the change from affordable to market rates is happening in all places all around the country, it's especially jarring for rural residents because supply is a whole lot more limited. If city officials, though, can keep tabs on the loan status of these local properties, they will be able to target assistance to the most vulnerable properties by renegotiating the Section 515 mortgages. So this could be by deferring their debt for another 20 years or a couple other options. And households living in these properties can also apply independently for subsidized housing vouchers so that they can independently try and make sure that they can stay in an affordable place. So laws and zoning restrictions that prohibit placement of multifamily housing near town centers can be counterproductive to attracting new development, but they exist in a whole lot of rural places right now. Creating or amending local housing policies and practices to allow multifamily affordable housing in town centers in rural areas can quickly inject a new workforce and a consumer base into these areas. A multifamily apartment building fits a whole lot more easily into a town center streetscape than a streetscape on the edge of town. So it makes a lot of sense to keep everything centralized. And the national demand for multifamily housing is continuing to rise for all levels of income. So developers may actually favor constructing multifamily units as opposed to single-family units. Another way to easily leverage developers' interest in high-density apartment-style construction is by providing density bonuses. So developers can build more units per square foot if they include a certain amount of affordable housing in their project. And the more affordable housing units they include, the more they can go beyond the zoning regulations' capacity allowances. So that's kind of a win-win. Communities get the affordable housing that's necessary for them, and the developers get higher yielding apartment-style projects, so they get more money coming in for them. And like I said before, with abandoned and underutilized buildings, local governments can actually acquire a lot of these buildings at little to no cost. The owners right now may actually be paying a lot more to keep them up just abandoned than letting them go. So this could potentially be through a small fee to transfer the title. And then the local government can pass this on to the private sector at a low cost as well, so the developer can have a much lower entry price than usual. Then the local government can use the low entry cost as leverage to require a certain amount of the units that they build to be affordable. And along the same line, you can also use historic tax credits, low mod tax credits, new market tax credits in order to make those underutilized buildings a whole lot more useful. Another option is incentive housing zones, or IHZs. So this offers exceptions to zoning regulations that may restrict the higher density mixed-use developments. Developers can build at a higher capacity or mixed use in these restricted zones if they also provide a public improvement in that location. And so public improvement could be anything like public recreation space, sidewalks, streetscaping, anything like that. You can also go to rd.usda.gov for a list of grants and programs to find ways to pay for affordable housing, to help you pay for affordable housing. And I'm also going to tell you about the case study that we've found that is the best example of all of these different tools, which is Old Saybrook, Connecticut Incentive Housing Zone. So they developed IHZs, as I said before. Their past zoning regulations actually discourage placement of affordable housing near job centers, which I think is true in a lot of rural places all around the country. And they actually had a very unique sewer avoidance policy because they're a waterfront town that already limits the town's growth. So in 2009, they adopted this IHZ to mix multifamily affordable housing into previously commercial-only zones. And so now this encourages new affordable housing to locate near job centers and transit. And now residents can actually walk and ride transit to work and recreation and other community amenities. So this helps avoid sprawl and traffic congestion while it actually encourages a more vibrant downtown where the residents have lifestyles that have transportation options, so they're not just required to be in a car. And in order to do this, they overlaid their existing zoning with a new layer of development exceptions so that the property owners can create workforce housing, and 20% of that is required to be affordable. And they also require that the IHCs have reasonable transit access and preserve at least 10% as open space. So that could be just a community facility, or it could be a park or anything like that. They were able to do this especially because they got community buy-in by communicating exactly their goals to the public and what they wanted to get out of having an IHC. So their local policy regulates for densities that best fit their town's character, and it's resulted in more than 100 new units of affordable housing since they've brought it in 2009. So we can't solve this challenge of affordable housing in rural areas overnight, but there are a whole lot of tools to bring in multifamily housing with low upfront cost. It mainly just requires having the local government and community support, and by combining a few of these tools, local governments can begin to protect and expand their own affordable housing. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jeff to discuss the Community Facilities Location Toolkit.
Thank you, Jerry, and thanks everyone for joining us today. I'm Jeff Anderson, President of Smart Growth America. The first toolkit I'm going to talk about is focused on community facility location policies. And you'll notice a theme straight away about the importance of location, both in the governor's comments and in the discussions of affordable housing and the placement of affordable housing, and now in community facilities. What we're talking about here is, of course, healthcare, parks, farmers markets, police stations, fire stations, courts, social services and buildings, other kind of important or crucial public facilities. And location, I think, at least in our sort of work in a lot of places around the country, is kind of an underappreciated aspect of these facilities and of development in general. The Community Facilities Program out of USDA is a great program in that it funds a lot of different activities, has a lot of flexibility. But it doesn't say a lot about location, and that leaves it sort of up to the localities to be thinking about that. And a lot of times, the main considerations are really very focused on the projects themselves. Do we have the land? Does this make sense in terms of our ability to get there? But there are a broader set of considerations that I think we're seeing as being very important. And when you particularly for smaller communities, and for instance, the USDA program is available to communities of 20,000 or less, making these decisions can have a really big impact on the future of the community. So questions like, does it reinforce the town's overall economic development strategy? Does it advance community goals like revitalizing the downtown? is it going to be near both a convenient location for potential employees, but also for the people it's meant to serve? And what are the implications going to be, both immediate in terms of the cost of construction, but then over time in terms of the infrastructure, the water and sewer, the services required, the roads required in terms of their upkeep over time. And so basically what we have identified is that some places are starting to think about a policy to sort of formalize these considerations, and that can take a range of aspects from a very informal decision simply to adopt as a matter of practice a review of a set of questions about where a facility should go, what the impacts are going to be, to something that your local town council might pass and require that certain facilities of certain kind or of particular funding origins or of different sizes must go through a particular review and ask and be able to answer a particular set of questions in terms of the location and its implications. When thinking about actually adopting a community facilities location policy, we've found it best not to have a facility that's in the pipeline where you're trying to make a decision about that right now. It's best to sort of roll it out as something that's more about the future and is trying to sort of articulate the overall goals a community has for your economic development, for your livability, for your future, and then how any future publicly funded facilities would contribute to that. You want to be, I think, clear about the factors that you're going to consider: transportation, the fiscal impacts, the location of employees, the location of residents, environmental concerns, desire to reuse existing public infrastructure. Those are the kinds of things that I think you just need to be transparent about in the places that have done this well. And again, it can be a fairly formal process where you do an in-depth analysis, you analyze traffic impacts, you do a full-blown fiscal impact analysis, which I'll talk about a little more in a minute. Or you can simply have a checklist and make sure you ask 10 key questions about a facility. Or you can draw a circle in your downtown and say, our goal is to revitalize the downtown, therefore any publicly funded facilities, we have a preference for putting them here first, and we're allowed to put it somewhere else, but we just need to be able to justify that. So sort of a stated preference for a particular location with the ability to opt out, but a reason why. And there are different places that have adopted this approach. I think a lot of places have them relatively informally, just as the natural process of deciding on the location of a capital facility. But some have made it more formal. The Dane County, Wisconsin has a kind of checklist embedded in their comprehensive plan. And then, the opposite of small towns, the General Services Administration has a formal policy for considering location factors in where federal facilities get located. But the idea is really the same. It's the same kind of impacts, the same kinds of questions, the same kind of costs and benefits that are being weighed to make that determination. The governor alluded to a couple examples under his tenure as governor in the state of Maryland. But I was hoping that you, Governor, would just comment a little bit on the Easton Maryland example.
Certainly. And I might add that there are dozens of examples like this, and working around the country, there are other examples popping up everywhere. But in the case of Easton, the state decided to build a new social services building to cover that part of the Eastern Shore. The department determined that the location would be outside of town by a small airport, a beautiful pastoral setting with geese on a pond and everything else, and it would have been delightful to work there. There's no question about it. However, in doing the analysis of where the clients were, 90-something% of the clients were in the town of Easton, and every one of them would have had to drive to this facility. And by the nature of the services, many of the clients were low income. And so instead, we combined several programs, and we took the old abandoned natural gas processing plant that was located in the heart of downtown. It was a brownfield. We cleaned up the brownfield. We built that there. and now about 80% of the clients are actually within walking distance or municipal transit to the facility. It's a tremendous success story.
And I think that's a great example, just because it really demonstrates the different answers you get when you use different factors to evaluate the siting decision. It's obviously not rocket science. It's just deciding that it's going to be about more than the employees and sort of what's easiest to get to, but it's going to be the combination of what do the employees need, and I'm sure the downtown site still met a lot of their needs, but also recognizing that there were some trade-offs in terms of the clients to be served and their ability to get to other locations and so forth. So I think the upshot of the fiscal of the facility location policy really is just to formalize the process of thinking about the factors that are important in your community, and then make sure that in any decision you're asking those questions and getting getting a clear understanding of what's being balanced against which other values you hold. And as a result, getting the best location for your community facility.
Well, thank you, Jeff. And Jerry, we talked about housing, and you talked about density. And in rural America, density is really the reason the second floor of that historic structure in the downtown, for example, or building within a grid of your little town close to the courthouse square or the town center. Density in rural America is relative, and in Meridian, if it was a second or third floor of a building, or where I live, building within the block of property that had been built 100 years ago or more. So that's the relative sense of density. And Jeff, you talked about really focusing your assets and where you put them so you can get the best return on investment. But as a former mayor, and I'll speak to the mayors on the call, we tend to think any investment in a small town or a rural area is a good one. But what I hear you telling me is some of those investments I may not be able to afford for the future. So if I sell bonds, which will pay off over 20 years, is there a tool that will help me assess what's that return on investment? Can I actually afford to build that asset, to invest in that asset, and pay it off over that time? How do I know that I'm making the right choice of the choices I have?
Yeah, and really again, this kind of comes back to some of the themes we were hitting on in the previous toolkit, and we've prepared a toolkit on fiscal impact analysis, which of course speaks directly to this question. This helps you to focus in on one of the factors that's a clearly important one in decision making. I like to think that a thriving community, you have to make the revenues balance against the expenses. That won't guarantee you have a thriving community, but you can pretty much guarantee you won't if you are out of balance and you have more expenses than revenue. So it's sort of necessary but not sufficient condition. So the fiscal impact modeling is really just about those revenues and expenses. It's trying to figure out, if I make a particular investment in infrastructure or a private sector developer comes along and builds a development or a subdivision, what is the impact going to be on my revenues and my expenses, both in the immediate term and in the long term? And fiscal impact analysis is exactly that calculation of revenues and expenses. There are a lot of places that have a formal policy about the need for any proposed development to go through such an analysis to understand the impacts of what that development is going to mean for tax revenues and for city or town expenses. Those policies take a variety of forms. They can apply only to private development or private and public infrastructure. You may have thresholds associated with them where it's got to be projects over a certain size are going to be analyzed, or projects with a certain mix of commercial or residential. And you also have to be aware of your jurisdictions. In some places, or in a lot of places, the school district is a different entity than the local government. And then you're talking about impacts to the schools as well as, and those can be large, as well as the impacts to fire and and transportation and police and so forth. So again, there's when it comes to a fiscal impact policy, you're really just requiring that kind of cost and revenue calculation. And you can do that in a formal fashion by passing an ordinance that requires fiscal impact analysis, or you can do it through an executive order of the mayor, or you can have an informal policy just in your review process to make sure that you're calculating the fiscal impacts. The results can also, how you use the results of that analysis can vary. It can simply inform the decision, or it can lead to specific actions. Some places have said, all right, well, if there are negative fiscal impacts, then we're going to ask the developer to pay the difference and to make up those costs to hold us harmless. One of the things I think that is illuminating about it is, as you say, John Robert, I think a lot of places may look at growth as that's just going to be a pure help. And what you find in fiscal impact analysis is that different developments have different impacts. And so not all are created equal, and some are more helpful than others. And the mix of commercial to retail to office to manufacturing makes a difference in that, as well as, and this I think is less well known, but is very important, and we've done a lot of work on this, the location of the development has a big impact. So the same house or the same 10,000 square feet of office or retail located differently within the community or arranged differently has different implications for revenues and costs. You can also think about applying fiscal impact analysis on a project-by-project basis, which can be, if you have a lot of development, you're going to be doing a lot of analysis. Some places have dealt with that by actually establishing geographic zones and basically trying to do an analysis of their overall growth area and figuring out that some areas are far more expensive to serve than others, and then essentially saying, all right, if you're in the innermost zone where you're close to everything and it doesn't require us, say, to build, if you're reusing existing infrastructure and you don't, your development won't require any new infrastructure, it's going to have a lot lower fiscal impact on your costs and generate more revenues than if you have to build new roads, new water and sewer, extend fire service or police service out to more remote locations. And so you can, again, do it by project or by zone. In thinking about if you do adopt a policy, whether just as a practice as part of your development review or as an actually passed ordinance, the administration is really important. Thinking about the methodology and making sure that your methodology accounts for location. That's probably one of the biggest things that we've seen, that a lot of methodologies don't account for location, and that ends up really giving some misleading results in many cases. I think it's a mistake to be thinking about the answer to the fiscal impact analysis being the answer to whether to do the development or not. This should inform your decision. We make decisions all the time that actually are going to cost money. If you think about a library, that's going to cost you money. And if you just made the decision to build libraries on whether it costs money or not, you'd never build a library. So it's a good thing to know what the impact is going to be on your budget, but you have to balance that against the other community goals and values that you have. Using local data is key. One of the pieces that's really, I think, informed and made our work more robust is being able to get local data in a lot of the communities that you've worked in, John Robert. To be able to really understand the costs and revenues that are going to happen in that community rather than using, say, statewide averages or national averages or something like that. And then, again, thinking about different thresholds, whether you want to administer it on a project basis or on a zone basis, whether there are different types of development that you want to make sure you analyze. Those are other key components to administering a fiscal impact analysis policy. One of the things that really is key in that is the importance of location. And we've done a lot of work now in places around the country and seen the importance of location. We've done some aggregation of other studies and of our own work, and we know that that location can changes in location can save 10% in annual operating costs and 35% in capital costs, and these can be significant savings or expenditures for particularly smaller localities. So the importance of location is key. Also, we know from past experience that using what you have, the infrastructure you've already built, the services you're already providing, the more that you can accommodate new development inside those envelopes, frankly, the cheaper it is and the more revenue you get from it, and that's an enormous win from a fiscal perspective. Anytime you can reuse existing capacity or use up unused capacity, that's big. And then just a note going back to the sort of question about what you do with the answers to fiscal analyses. Housing, we find, often doesn't pay or only breaks even, and that's a particular place that I think we would, where you have to balance sort of what your goals are as a community against, this specific factor that you use in making decisions. We've got a couple of case studies from some of the work that we've done around the country on this topic. One of the places, in addition to the communities that John Robert mentioned, that we've worked is in Macon, Georgia. Macon Bibb County recently merged, and they're looking at different development scenarios and thinking about where to put their public resources, and have focused a lot on downtown revitalization and trying to get a vital downtown. And we found some very interesting findings in analyzing the implications of directing development there. We compared downtown development to kind of what's more typical, more scattered greenfield development out at the edge. We compared it to what happens if you actually clustered that development, but still more at the edge of the kind of existing development footprint, and compared that as well to downtown. And basically, if you are looking at a continued pattern of scattered development at the edge in Macon Bibb County, you're looking at every additional unit of that development costing money, costing $420 to the county on a per acre basis, $60 per capita, and also costing the school district money. And this is one of the cases where the local government and the school district were different and or separate responsibilities, and both were going to basically see their budgets moved into the red by this additional development.
So when you say cost, you mean cost more than return?
Yes, cost more than return. So you were going to get some tax revenue, but the amount you were going to have to spend to supply the infrastructure and maintenance and keep up with the infrastructure needs, you were going to end up spending more than you were getting. And then even if you managed to cluster that development out on the edge of the developed area, it was still going to cost more than you were going to get back from the county's perspective. You would actually gain a little bit from the school district's perspective. So you can see that it's not always the same, and it's important to do the analysis for the different pieces. But in the downtown, both the school district and the county both gained, and if you could get that to be even a reasonable sort of density for Macon Bibb for the downtown there, something appropriate to their scale and feel for the neighborhood and for the town, your revenues would even more greatly exceed your expenses in those cases. And so just knowing that, made it possible, I think, from a justification standpoint to say, yes, we should be dedicating our economic development efforts to the downtown, because we know that it's going to actually increase our fiscal security and bring in more revenues than it's going to bring in costs over time, not just at the beginning. And then that in turn is going to help us to serve the outer parts of Macon Bibb as well, because if we're generating extra money from this development downtown, we can deliver more in services, or if we want, we can cut the tax rate, and those are then options that become available. But key to all of that was just understanding what is the fiscal impact going to be? What are the impacts to revenue? What are the impacts to cost? And understanding that 200 houses and 100,000 square feet of commercial and retail, it matters where you put that in the community, and it makes a big difference for your fiscal and economic health. So that's really what the fiscal impact analysis policy helps localities, again, to just formalize that process of examining the impacts of new development, and then it's up to the locality how they factor that into the decisions about whether to do a development, whether not to do a development, whether to ask for changes, or whether to try to recoup some of the costs, or what they're going to do with the excess revenues.
So you also know a local elected who's got to vote and make a decision needs to know what it's going to cost them, bottom line, not only today, but for the next 50 years of supporting that infrastructure.
Yeah, and that's where we typically see that there's an information gap. There's generally pretty good information about the first flush of money that you're going to get, but not very good information about the maintenance that occurs over time. And so you get a little bit of money up front, but then the costs erode that until you're in the hole.
Well, that certainly sums up in a pretty neat package why this is so important. And at this point, we're going to turn it over to open it up for questions, I should say. Thank you, Jeff and Jerry, Governor, and John Robert for explaining these toolkits. I think there's a lot to unpack here, and we have a lot of questions from the audience. If you have questions and are following along on the webinar, you can type them into your webinar screen on the lower left-hand side. There's a little box there that we'll be able to read. You can also tweet them to us on Twitter at the handle SmartGrowthUSA. And just as a reminder, you can download all of these toolkits today at smartgrowthamerica.org/rural development. I'm going to go ahead and answer the first and most common question, which is yes, this webinar will be recorded. Not to worry, every webinar we have, folks ask this question, so don't worry about typing too furiously. This will make the slides and the discussion available after the fact. So I'm going to start with a basic question, or a fundamental question, and Jeff, I'm going to direct this to you. Someone wrote in to say, when you say that affordability is defined as 30% of area median income, what is the definition of area, and how can I figure out what qualifies for affordable housing in my area?
So yeah, I'm glad you asked that, because this is a very specific definition that we're using in this toolkit for what's frankly very low income households. So the area median income is a measure that is used by the federal government, and you can find that on HUD's website, and we can maybe follow up with a direction to a link to that. But those are basically calculated by the federal government, showing what the area median income is, and then different programs essentially kick in at different percentages of area median income. 30% of area median income is generally very low income housing, and generally needs some kind of subsidy from outside programs or public funds to be able to make that work. And one of the things I think we wanted to try to accomplish with this toolkit was to call out the fact that a lot of that housing, as Jerry was pointing out, that's been around for a long time, that people have taken for granted as a source of affordable housing for those who need it a lot, is going to expire under the mortgage program. And people may not be aware of that. It was housing that was initiated nearly 30 years ago, and so if you're like me, you haven't been avidly tracking that, but you could suddenly find yourself with a lot of that stock becoming unavailable, and people who've been relying on that not able to find housing. So that's one of the reasons we were focused specifically on that cohort of housing.
Great. Yeah, we'll be following up with everyone who is registered for this event with the recording, and can include some more information about exactly that in that information. The second question from our listeners is for you, John Robert. You talk to folks in rural communities a lot about these things. Someone wrote in to say, I like these ideas, but my colleagues are skeptical. What is the best way to convince them?
Well, I would suggest you make your argument, and I found that most effective on this is an economic development strategy. Of the many places I've traveled, I find that the local leaders understand that they have to have vibrant places for job creation and to attract their own children and grandchildren home, much less other young workers. But how do they make their hometown a vibrant place? And I think they lack the strategies to move towards this development. That's certainly where I hope these toolkits will help and where we can help in the future. They lack the reassurance, and I think that's where the questioner's concern comes from. How can we be reassured? Well, when the person who is creating the jobs tells you, I'm willing to come to small towns in rural America, but you've got to have broadband access, and you've got to have a vibrant little downtown, and I can show you places like Conway, Arkansas that have done that and have 3 new tech firms to boast because of it. So I think those kind of examples can help turn a reluctant city council person or a reluctant mayor turn around on this issue. The examples we offer, look at Quitman, Mississippi. We did what we call a hotspot analysis. It's kind of a smaller fiscal impact analysis for them, but they knew they wanted to grow. They had a choice of 6 properties, but which one made the most sense financially? And with the work we did for them, there was one clear winner, and Quitman's off to the races to develop that in mixed use and housing and in public spaces right adjacent to their little downtown and become a thriving place. So make it all about economic development.
Absolutely. And a lot of the conversations that we've had today have been about places that these individual communities. One of the questions that we got in, though, is about a regional scale. So, Governor, I'd like your perspective on this. Does it make sense? Obviously, siting things close to downtown makes sense on a community-by-community basis. Can it be done at a regional scale? I think the person who wrote in is working with a large region of many rural communities. Does it make sense, or have you ever seen an example where several communities within a region each specialize?
It does make sense. It can be done. And in fact, just a week, 10 days now, I'm going to Lancaster, Pennsylvania, to work with the county government there. They have over 60 municipalities, almost all very small inside the county. They're trying to revise their plans and figure out how to do exactly some of these things with such a decentralized decision-making. There are several things that we normally recommend, and that is that, first of all, we try to get everyone on the same page of a vision of what they want that region or that county to be. And then within that vision, recognize that you're going to have all different kinds of specialties. And so one small community might focus on its historic nature and become a small historic town that adds to the economic development of the larger region. Another might become a really cool place with several blocks of restaurants and sidewalk cafes where all the young folks love to go. But the point is they come to that county or that region. The other thing is to try to have a general understanding that if we're going to do this, we ought to be using the same tools. And so to the extent that we can get cost analysis for facilities, or to the extent that we can decide what a priority is of having some, let's say, regional balance in terms of affordable housing. They do work out this way, and I've seen it personally in terms of a number of jurisdictions, and I think you're going to see more and more of that. To do that, by the way, and this goes back to the earlier point, I think it's actually fairly important, not necessarily to talk about smart growth or to talk about environmental issues or something of this type, but say, what is the end product we're really trying to achieve? It's about economic development, it's about shared prosperity, it's about being competitive in a technologically changing world, it's about keeping our rural agricultural community strong. And if we agree on those, then everything else that we're talking about here just become tools on how to achieve those values.
Well, on that theme, I've heard from several people in the comments asking, how do I find out more information about this if I wanted to bring these strategies to my town or community? where could I go? Are consulting services available? That's something that folks are asking about. So John Robert, can you talk a little bit about how folks can get help using these toolkits from us?
Sure. This is really the work we do in our various workshops across the country, and I'd urge you to go to our website, smartgrowthamerica.org /work with us, and you'll find whether it's coming in to do a fiscal impact analysis so it can help shape your thinking for the future and inform your thinking for the future, and honestly help educate your public, because I've faced those council meetings where you need to win over a skeptical public. And again, I've found regardless of the size of the community, these same truths apply. There's a different order of magnitude in resources, of course, and of different order of magnitude of the problem, but the truths hold the same. And so there are workshops you can compete for that are funded by several federal agencies. You can find those on our website as well. Another round of competition may be opening up, and would urge you to submit. And this isn't about how beautifully written your application is. This is about showing to us you understand your need and your commitment to work with us. And as I said, we've worked in some mighty small places, and I would tell you that a smaller place is easier to turn around than a big metropolitan area.
And if people, once they go on our website, don't see exactly what they're looking for, or if they're unsure which workshops or other assistance might be applicable, you can also just email us directly. You can email Erica Young at eyoung@smartgrowthamerica.org, and she can help to sort of sort out the different services we provide and figure out the best match for you. So that's eyoung@smartgrowthamerica.org.
And you can certainly call me or email me, jrsmith@smartgrowthamerica.org. Because you're local leaders, I'll give you my phone number, 601-527-5040. I know what it's like to have to reach out and seek help. I'm certainly available to you. And remember, as local leaders, we promise two things running for office. We're going to create jobs, and we're going to build a hometown our children want to come back to. And if you want to fulfill those two promises, these are some of the things you need to consider.
So, John Robert, you better give your number again now that people have a pen.
Right. 601-527-5040. John Robert Smith.
And wait till we're off the webinar to call him, because he's got his phone right here. It'll start ringing.
Well, now y'all have no reason not to get started on some of the things that we've talked about today. That brings us to the top of the hour. I want to thank all of our panelists for sharing your knowledge about this subject, and to everyone on the phone who's been listening in. Look for a little bit more information from us coming soon, and thank you so much. It's been great to talk with you today.